Hello everyone and welcome back to the NPC Dungeon. Today I have a very special episode prepared. It's the finale to the story that I've been telling recently on this channel. If you aren't fully caught up, I'll leave a link below and a card above to the playlist the story is a part of. But without any further ado, let's just get on with the story. Well, first, I'm going to do my usual quick little recap, as is my custom by now. The players, by one means or another, all found themselves bound together on a quest to a mysterious cave to recover an ancient artifact. One of my players realized this artifact was sacred to her god. Another realized that her mentor, who had sent her on this quest to begin with, wasn't being completely honest with her. Subject 66, the party's resident bee Rex, found out that perhaps vengeance on his creator might be at hand as they convened upon their quarry, the wizard Verpros Galfo, Inky's wizard mentor. After defeating a group of mind flayers from a colony that had apparently been looking for the same artifact, they made an unexpected ally, apparently the first to fall victim to Galfo's wrath. They approached the door behind which they knew Galfo stood. Finding the outlines of their hands similar to the ones that led them into the cave in the first place, placed their hands upon them and stepped inside. And this is where we begin. Before them stretched a long path, a bridge of stone suspended in a wide open cavern, ending in an island of rock extending to the other side of the room, upon which stood a wiry old man, clad now in dark robes and malice, glaring at them from his distant perch in front of a small stone dome. The party tried to shout to him, but he made no reply as he stood there motionless, leaving them no choice but to come to him. As they did so, Alice and Subject 66, with their keen sight, picked up on various arcane sigils carved into the ground on the bridge. These were traps. They scuffed them with their feet as Inky casted Dispel Magic, and they continued forward, simply avoiding the ones they couldn't disturb. Seraphina stepped in front, extending one of her blades in her massive, angelic hands. "Time's up, Galfo," she bellowed. "Time for you to pay for what you've done." But Galfo merely chuckled. "And what exactly did she tell you?" he asked, glowing up at the Drider stalking up from behind them. "She told us enough," Inky interjected. "We know how you betrayed her, and how you're using us." "Is that what you think?" Galfo asked, his voice nearly a whisper. "Please tell, how exactly do you think the dead Holt became as dead as it is? Surely you noticed the withered forest on the way here. Do you care to tell them what really happened?" He looked back at the Drider. "No," she screeched. "She destroyed it. Liar." Galfo's expression softened as he looked upon his apprentice. "Inky," he said, "I never lied to you. I sent you here to destroy it." But Inky thought back. He couldn't be telling the truth, could he? But there's a shred of truth to his words nonetheless. He might have lied to her, but so had the Drider. The spiders, once elves. If the Drider had lived here as she said she did, and if Galfo had attacked as she said he did, then why were there any left? Why did she use them as guards and stand by as the party killed them? Because she was the one who attacked them first. Because she never sought refuge here. The timeline made no sense. If that was the case, the Mind Flayer colony wouldn't have shown up until after the place was destroyed. But according to Alice's father, the place was still a sanctuary in his time. The Mind Flayers would have had no time to build up their colony here the way they did. They didn't steal it together and bring it here. It was already here, under the control of the religious group living here. They stole it, its power got away from them, destroying the forest, and they turned on each other. They both wanted it, and were willing to do anything to get it. As Inky looked up from her realization, she saw the Drider behind them, and the wizard before them, glaring past the party at each other, and upon realizing what Inky knew, they looked down at them, an unmistakable agreement between adversaries. They had to get rid of the group now. They still needed them to get into the dome to get at the stone, but they could sort that out later. For now, they had them surrounded, so they attacked. Galfo extended his hand forward as the ground shook, and an earth elemental slid forward into the fray. It slid toward Inky, but Subject 66 had other plans. He retrieved a small metallic orb that he retrieved from the treasury they had recently found themselves in, and watched as it transformed into a massive automaton. It stepped in the way, shield up, and blocked the thing from attacking Inky. She turned to thank him, but he had already turned invisible to fly away. Typical. Seraphina turned to the Drider, swiping at her legs one by one as Alice leapt toward her, digging one of her psionic blades into the creature's back. The Drider tried to kick Seraphina away, but she stood firm. Alice, however, wasn't so lucky as the Drider threw her off her back and over the edge. Alice just barely held on as the massive spidery legs plummeted from overhead. Alice looked up as an eldritch blast echoed through the cavern and ran to the Drider before she could crash down in Alice's hands. She had to thank Inky for that later. Galfo saw this and commanded Inky to open the dome. She looked over, only one handprint. It shifted from one form to the other. It would be so easy. She glued herself, but then she shook off the effect and shot a bolt of fire at the wizard. The elemental and the automaton were still locked in combat as Seraphina knelt down to help Alice, taking a sharp stab from the Drider as she did. Poison coursed through her body as Alice rolled back upon the bridge. The wizard's hand extended as Webbing fastened Alice to the ground, and sharp, spidery legs came down upon her and pierced into her shoulders. Inky looked around, herself injured as well as her companions, either bound up or poisoned. She was out of options, or so she thought. She looked up at the sound of a puff of druid magic and a plummeting noise as a massive whale came careening down before them. Alice broke out of the webs and rolled away as Seraphina jumped back as the whale landed atop the Drider and crashed to the bridge, falling into the depths below. But the Drider wasn't done. Her spidery legs held onto the edge as only Subject 66 in a whale form plummeted down into what appeared to be a shallow pool of some kind of briny liquid below. His form reverted from the damage he took, and though hurt, he was still standing. He looked around, spotting a sheer cliff edge to a high platform not far off from the platform the rest of the party had stood on, before downing a healing potion and making his way back up. Talk about Next Machina. My player found that idea online somewhere, and I'm still so happy that he did. That was such a fun encounter to run. Anyway, meanwhile, Seraphina took her chance. Her arms ignited in flame as she stalked toward the Drider. The creature begged for her life, but the pleas fell on deaf ears as Seraphina slashed her sword down top however. You missed your chance, she said. Subject 66 dodged the falling Drider and emerged back up with the rest of the group, but they had no time to reflect as Galfo hurled a fireball at them from across the new gap in the bridge. It hit its mark as Inky casted the little webbing of her own, fastening Galfo to the floor on his side of the bridge. Seraphina and Inky stood there, congratulating Subject 66 on his maneuver, ready to fly with him to the other side. But Alice was already there. She was the only one to end up on the other side of the rift when Subject 66 fell through. Galfo looked up at her. "Open the door, you fool," he shouted, but Alice succumbed to the magic, walking to the dome. The rest tried to stop her, but it was too late. By the time they got to her, the door was already open and Galfo had already wriggled loose of the webbing. He rushed over to Alice, but she snapped out of it in time and stepped back, stone in hand, as Subject 66 stepped in between them. Galfo turned to flee, but Seraphina was already standing directly behind him. "Going somewhere?" she asked as she rested her hand on his shoulder, banishing him to the hells. His form disappeared, but what to do now? Subject 66's automaton had finished destroying the elemental, and the party began to discuss among themselves the next course of action as a low baritone cackling sounded from around them. No, from within their own heads. The voice was familiar. It was the Elder Brain that had spoken to them upon their arrival. "Enough of this petty squabbling. You have retrieved it, now bring it to me." And the area around them lit up in a sickly green light, revealing in even greater detail the ledge that Subject 66 saw from below. Upon it, a massive brain sat in a pool of brine, pulsing as it spoke, and as it did, 6 smaller brains floated in from the side, sporting long, spiny tentacles and pointy beaks. The rest of the cavern lit up as well, revealing countless little platforms jutting out from the now visible cave walls, each housing shelters and settlements, and each housing countless mind flares glaring down at them from above. They were trapped. The Elder Brain pierced into their heads, commanding them one by one to bring it the stone, but one by one they refused or held each other back. Blasts of energy careened in from the brain, rocking the ground they stood upon as the innumerable mind flares from above blasted their minds with waves after waves of concussive force. The creatures flying in slashed and pecked at them as well. The party itself was on their last leg, struggling to even stand on their own feet as Galfo re-emerged into the fray and besieged Subject 66, who now had the stone. He staggered, his form torn and bloody with ripped clothes. "I am your creator," he said. "I can give you answers." But Subject 66 simply growled and mustered up his last remaining strength to fly over to Galfo, pick him up by his shoulders, and rise into the air, dropping him back down to the ground with a sick thud. There he lay motionless. And as Subject 66 returned to his companions, one last mind blast told them that they couldn't survive there much longer. The group looked to each other and nodded. They only had one option. Subject 66 threw the stone upon the ground, fracturing it and breaking it open. Shadow and cackling mouths emerged with writhing, spindly spider arms and more eyes than anyone thought possible. Its form shifted and changed until it took the shape of a massive spider. A god now stood before them. An actual god, as Alice gazed upon the face of who she had pledged herself to. Disgust boiled within her heart as she turned and backed away. Mor'toz stood before them, stirring up with the Elder Brain. But the Elder Brain stood back at it. The two locked in some kind of battle of wills. Sheer divine power against the will and determination of generations of mind flayers gathered into a single colony for one purpose. They wouldn't lose so easily. The party had their chance and took it. They ran away. They knew this water had to drain somewhere, and as they ran, they eventually came across a wide pool into which the brine flowed, covered in grated metal bars. Subject 66 and Seraphina broke through as Inky spared one look back. Alice looked back at her. "What have we done?" she said, as they jumped down into the darkness. The current swept them away as they drifted through the dark tunnels until the soft moonlight touched their faces once again, and they drifted through a river leading through the dead Holt. They paused for a moment, processing the events that had just transpired, almost no longer believing what they could see around them. The world felt unnatural, like it was on borrowed time. Seraphina looked around for anyone she could see, and indeed, a search party had been sent, headed by the impish detective she had worked with so long ago. He was happy to have found her, but she clearly had other matters to tend to. "Listen," she said, "we need to get everyone out of Nine Trees. A god is broken loose, and the world is going to end." The detective blinked. "Okay, are you alright?" He clearly didn't believe her. Inky shouted in desperation as well, but nothing seemed to convince him. The detective looked them over. They're bloody and bruised and just washed up in a river. "Look, you clearly need rest," he said. "How about I take you back to the Drunken Dretch and we talk about this in the morning?" He was certainly right about that. They were tired, so against their better judgment, they followed him back and rested for the night. Sheer dread washed over them as their anxieties took hold. Seraphina took the night to contact her patron god and ask for guidance. A bright light filled her room as she was told that the world as they know it will end, and there is nothing they could do about that. But there is a way to rebuild. A city in the distance. From there, you may rally an army. Only through alliances can a way be forged. The rest hardly got any sleep themselves as they stirred to wakefulness the next morning. Alice turned away from the group. She learned all too much about herself lately and needed to gather her thoughts and reevaluate. She needed to return to her roots and decided to take a new, non-violent approach to life. Inky and Seraphina turned to her in disbelief. "Really?" they gasped. "You're just going to run away when we need you most." But Alice simply trudged away, as did Subject 66. He'd achieved his revenge but wasn't satisfied. He searched for a worthy opponent and knew that he was destined to become the apex hunter of these lands. He wandered aimlessly, consumed by his goal, masking the equally consuming guilt he felt, or perhaps running from it. He watched the world transform as gloomy desert encroached upon the land. The creatures shifted and changed in shape and form, morphing into hideous beasts that he fell one by one, until catching sight of the most otherworldly and intimidating creature yet, a massive, unnatural, fungal entity standing nearly 20 stories high. This was it. He dug his feet in and reared back before charging marching forward toward it. Subject 66, named to be feared by all across this land, fell here in the fight of his life against a creature from beyond his realm. Alice, meanwhile, watched over and protected her people from the oncoming desert as life became more and more scarce around her. And Inky and Seraphina took it upon themselves to do no less than save the world. At the base of Inky's door, in the Drunken Dredge Inn, she found a slip of paper, an invitation to research at the University of Jovmor, an ancient and acclaimed place of learning, her life's ambition and the reason for her studying with Gelfo in the first place. Here's her chance to learn about this creature and how to end it, and here's the city Seraphina learned about. Here was their chance. They took the last boat leaving for Jovmor and convinced as many people as they could to join them. There, they watched the darkness encroaching around them as Inky pored over document after document in endless research. She realized that if they destroyed the brain, so too would fall the god. But what was its weakness? As she toiled away, Seraphina welcomed in whatever refugees she could, becoming a bit of a community and spiritual leader as Inky handled the more presidential and scientific responsibilities. Seraphina beseeched her god once more to send down an army of angels. It took some convincing, but an army she received. Inky completed her research just as things looked hopeless for this endeavor, finding a weakness in concocting a serum that would cripple the brain and leave it open for an attack. And finally, with their resources gathered, Seraphina marched off with her army, taking a flight as their scouts found the brain's base finally. In the anxious days that followed, the city waited in silent panic as the darkness ceased and the deserts finally began to recede and the angels flew back. They had succeeded, but they weren't done yet. The city rocked with joy and laughter as its new leaders were crowned, but they still had to rebuild all of society, and it wasn't long before lone Kitsune appeared at the gates. They let her in, and she was soon summoned to Inky's office, as she had now since become what is essentially the president of the world's last great civilization. Alice was allowed back in, but Inky needed her to teach their citizens trades and rebuild their economy by any means she thought necessary. And so they worked until one day, one of their search parties came back with the body of a creature, half bee, half dinosaur. Inky requested that it be kept under her care as they constructed statues and monuments to their late companion, using his face as the symbol and flag of their great city, which they had built up and cultivated to last for millennia to come. And that's it. I really hope you enjoyed it. It's probably one of my favorites. As always, thanks for watching. And as always, of course, feel free to come back next week. I have a whole new story that I'm going to tell, and an episode all about note-taking as a player. Until then, let's learn something.